Coming into today, I had this preconception that what happened with Blockbuster, where you were CEO, was simply that the young, nimble Netflix outmaneuvered you, and you were the old, stodgy, unchanging. But I did some reading, and it doesn't appear that that's the right explanation.
Correct.
There was a lot going on with Blockbuster, there was change going on with the digital delivery. There was change in the CEO seat where you came in with Carl Icahn, who was a blessing and a curse, I'm sure, in your life. Created an opportunity,
I learned a lot.
But you had an activist shareholder breathing down your neck. You had a balance sheet that was upside down with enormous debt. They'd eliminated the late fees, which I feel like I paid a lot of them with my children every Friday going down to Blockbuster. But I read that like the year before they stopped, and you wanted to put the late fees back on. It's like $800 million a year in revenue from late fees. That was just staggering. So they basically had cut off a revenue stream, leveraged the balance sheet. You got an activist investor who wants you to squeeze profits. What was that experience like?
It was fun.
Fun.
Yeah, I learned a lot.
I bet.
An awful lot. But thank you for doing your homework, by the way, because Blockbuster is a great example of perception. You look on the internet, you'll see my name, and you'll see somebody say, "Oh yeah, he's the idiot that turned down Netflix for $50 million,"
Right.
which happened.
Yes.
But in the year 2000, 7
7 years before you got there. Yeah.
And my response to them is, did you buy the stock at 79 cents, genius?
Yeah. Right.
Well, and before you respond fully, just to add to that preconceived notion, it wasn't until like a couple weeks ago when I was at another SME BLC where I forgot the gentleman's name, but he was at Blockbuster and he talked about it. And then I brought up you, and he's like, oh, well, he came in after the decision was already made. So what the preconceived notion I had was you were the captain of the Titanic that hit a glacier. And what I learned from that one little interaction was you were the Titanic, you were the captain of the Titanic after it was already sinking.
It was listing, not sinking.
Okay,
it was.
I'm not a nautical. It's all the same.
It hadn't hit the iceberg. The iceberg was the 2008 financial crisis. That was the iceberg. We were struggling anyway because when I arrived in 2007, the company had already been violating bank covenants 2 or 3 times. Banks were ready to shut them down. They kept them going and allowed us to defer our debt obligations through 2009 because we had a plan now to transform the company. So the first bullet that we dodged was when I joined the company. Now, in hindsight, and this is the benefit of a crystal ball if we had one, I was trying to take the company private. I had a lot of private equity support after a very good run at 7-Eleven with a 10x increase in the equity value. So private equity was saying, please let us go buy something with you. And my plan was to take Blockbuster private. Now, had we done that, we would have refinanced $1 billion worth of debt at about 6% interest and never batted an eyelash during the financial crisis. So I missed that window, no big deal. Carl Icahn talked me into leaving it public. He said, Keyes, you're the operator. I'm the financial guy. Trust me.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll keep that $1 billion of debt.
Yeah. So, hey, he didn't have a crystal ball, neither did I, so we said, fine. The first thing we did was to acquire a streaming video company from the studios. Excellent property, had all new releases, 3,000 titles already digitized. Now, there wasn't much we could do about it because there were no smart TVs. There was no Wi-Fi capability. And people were just thinking about putting a box out to be able to plug into your TV to be able to stream. But it was very early. We acquired that. We fixed the stores. We were working with the rating agencies to improve our debt rating so I could refinance the debt. Year 2008 rolls around. Now I've got about 12 months under my belt, doubled EBITDA. Things are looking good. Had a streaming company. Competitive advantage versus Netflix. We had this thing called Total Access. We had streaming, we had stores online, by mail delivery, kiosks. We had the whole
Yeah.
enchilada. And in September or October of 2008, Moody's finally called me up and said, good news, we're going to give you a 2-notch upgrade in your debt rating. Good, now I can refinance that debt.
Yeah.
The trouble is when they put the article out in the Wall Street Journal, and I've still got a copy of it today, said flashback. Blockbuster, based on its superb operating performance, is going to get a 2-notch upgrade in their debt rating. However, because of the collapse of Lehman Brothers and the worldwide financial markets, they may not be successful in refinancing their debt, so therefore we're going to increase their probability of default rating.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Can we just, never mind, I didn't want the upgrade,
Yeah.
you know?
It took the narrative, didn't they?
They just sucked the wind right out of our sales. But still, no problem. We had 90-day credit terms from our studio partners. No big deal. We'll make it through. I actually got the debt, a piece of it refinanced. A little higher interest rate than I would have liked, but we're out there working it. Carl said, that'll never happen. You'll never get it done. We got it done. We got it refinanced. The real thing, that the iceberg, wasn't even the financial crisis. It was the fear among the studios, because I only had 6 suppliers. With 90-day credit terms, I had no liquidity issues at all. But when one took me from 90 days to cash, that then started the dominoes falling. And when all 6 studios took us to cash payment terms, that pulled $300 million in flow right out of the company.
Yeah.
And within 2 weeks, we had no choice but to file.
Was that done because of that article? Because of perception of fear?
Yeah, the article came out. Not that article. There was another article. I had hired a firm. I tried to hire. My preference was to hire Haynes and Boone here in Dallas, a good all-purpose law firm. I was talked into by my board hiring Kirkland and Ellis, known for bankruptcy restructurings.
Yeah.
So when I hired Kirkland and Ellis, that rumor leaked.
That's a signal. Yeah.
And that was the signal.
Yeah.
And that's what spooked the studios. I said,
Yeah.
well, these guys hired bankruptcy counsel. They're going to file. I don't want to be left standing. And so I think it was Paramount was the first one to take us to cash terms. The others heard, and they're like,
That's a huge lesson about, how perception drives so much.
massive lesson.
Especially with fear.
Yeah.
Because like the perception of fear, and then all of a sudden, it just escalates.
Yeah. And the studios are still paying for it today. Because what they did is they had a window. It was called, you think about movies, you make a $500 million movie and it goes to the theaters for about 2 months. And then it would go into this rental window where we would pay the studios a revenue share, half of the $5 we were charging to rent it. And that would last another 3 to 6 months. And then, only then, it would go into the all-you-can-eat buffet, Netflix,
Yeah.
HBO. So when they basically panicked and put us out of business, they also collapsed a very, very valuable window of profitability for the studios. So they're paying for it still, but it's the lesson is so rich, and that's why if people would just take the time to do what you did, all you did is research the facts.
Right.
And you said, oh my gosh, Netflix didn't kill Blockbuster, $1 billion of debt in a finance capital market.
And Reed
Killed
Hastings
Blockbuster.
said in an interview not terribly long ago that even up until that time, when those factors drove you to bankruptcy, he still thought you guys were gonna kill him.
Oh yeah.
So again, my perception was that they just outran you, outmaneuvered you. They were scared to death of you all the way up until basically your demise.
We had our shoe on them in a big way. We had a superior streaming product. They had old movies. We had new releases.
Yeah.
80% of Blockbuster's business was new releases. So
Yeah.
far superior business model. One thing there were 2 things I don't talk about much because they were never disclosed. We were all under NDAs. We had an opportunity to lock up 60% of all the old movies. So we already had the new movies.
Yeah.
We had 60% of the old movies exclusively. Studios wanted us to have that.
Yeah.
But it would have been a $100 million a year obligation. And no one knew how many years it would take to monetize that. It could have been 10 years before Wi-Fi was strong enough to really support a streaming.
Yeah.
This is before the iPad was even launched.
Yeah.
Well, to that point, it's if I remember correctly, and again, this is years ago, but like all those companies that laid all the fiber lines and all the oceanic territories, because of it's so obvious of the need to have all those fiber lines. I think they all went out of business bankrupt
Yeah.
because it was so expensive to do that, and they never turned a profit, so they had to go bankrupt.
Yeah.
And somebody else can fact check me on me, but that sounds accurate. So when you were telling the story about laying all the groundwork for the streamers, but it just wasn't there yet, it was like, well, that's just immediately what I thought of is all those fiber lines.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Well, and another piece of the story that really very few know is that we actually did succeed in restructuring Blockbuster, took it through a filing, kept it from being liquidated,
Right.
sold it to Dish Networks.
Right.
Dish could have, again, crushed Netflix. Dish was a bit of a perfectionist, Charlie Ergen, the CEO. He wasn't satisfied with the state of streaming, and he wasn't satisfied with the delivery method. He wanted to keep improving it, the actual software that we were using to order up the movies, etc. But his vision was to bypass the internet and go straight to wireless, because he believed very strongly that that was a better solution, that we would get to 5G faster than we ultimately did, and wireless would be a much better delivery mechanism than traditional internet. So he placed that bet when he bought Blockbuster. Our stores would have been distribution centers for Sprint and T-Mobile that he was also trying to buy. And imagine that world where he buys up all of these stores, sells Sprint and T-Mobile service out of them. Every one of those services comes with free Blockbuster inside.
Wow. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And we've got a lock on all the new releases, et cetera, that he could sell video on demand. It was a great business model. But when the government didn't release that Wi-Fi capability and that spectrum that he had been amassing for years, until many years later, he threw up his hands and said, nah, forget about it. We'll close down the stores and put the brand on the shelf.
Such a fine line between extraordinary success and failure in that case. These small, big events, but somewhat unpredictable events that occur.
Change.
I'm sure that was a great learning experience.